Chapter 3. The Edge of the World. The flight to Edinburgh was a blur of engine hums and sleepless anxiety. I spent the entire transatlantic crossing staring at the glowing blue face of the Breguet watch, watching the diamond stars track across their synthetic lapis sky. Every person who walked past my seat in the dim cabin glanced at it, drawn in by that strange, pale luminescence. I found myself covering it with my sleeve, already feeling the heavy, protective instinct of someone carrying a dangerous secret. From Edinburgh, I rented a beaten-up 4x4 with a manual transmission and drove north. Modern GPS became useless the moment I crossed the invisible border into the deep highlands. The smooth highways degraded into narrow, single-lane asphalt ribbons, which eventually dissolved into rocky, unmapped logging trails, cutting through walls of ancient Caledonian pines. The landscape was brutal, beautiful, and completely indifferent to human existence. Jagged black ridges sliced through a low, suffocating ceiling of gray clouds. The rain didn't fall, it seemed to hang in the air, a thick, freezing mist that clung to the windshield and turned the world into a monochromatic watercolor painting. By late afternoon, the logging trail ended abruptly at the edge of a deep, glacial ravine. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic pinging of the cooling exhaust manifold and the distant, haunting roar of a hidden waterfall. I pulled out the scanned map from the diary. According to the hand-drawn coordinates, the estate lay another 3 miles into the valley, accessible only on foot through a narrow gorge known locally as the Devil's Throat. I packed my gear. A high-intensity tactical flashlight, a heavy-duty crowbar, basic climbing rope, my laptop with the Cipher data, and the pocket watch, which I secured in a padded inner pocket closest to my chest. Stepping out of the vehicle, the Scottish wind hit me like a physical blow. It was a wet, biting cold that instantly numbed my face. I pulled my beanie down tight, adjusted the straps of my pack, and stepped into the mist. The hike was grueling. The ground beneath the moss was treacherous, black, sucking peat bog that tried to pull my boots off with every step. The trees here grew thick and deformed, their branches twisting together like gnarled fingers, blocking out what little daylight remained. And then, as I rounded a massive, sheer cliff face of wet basalt, the valley opened up. There it was. The Stross estate. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress designed to outlive the end of the world. Built entirely from dark, rain-slicked granite, the massive Gothic structure sat on a lonely promontory overlooking a black, glassy loch. High, narrow slit windows stared out like empty eyes. Towering stone chimneys cut into the gray sky like jagged teeth. A sprawling, rusted iron fence surrounded the property, choked by decades of dead ivy. The air here felt different. Heavy. Static. I approached the monumental front entrance. 2 massive oak doors, reinforced with black wrought iron straps, stood before me. Carved directly into the stone lintel above the frame was the exact same crest from the diary, the wolf gripping a broken gear in its jaws. I reached out, my wet glove pressing against the freezing wood, and pushed. With a deep, resonant groan that echoed through the hidden valleys behind me, the heavy doors slowly gave way. Chapter 4. Echoes in the Dark. The interior of the mansion was a cathedral of dust and decay. As I stepped across the threshold, my boots clicked sharply against the black and white marble tiles of the grand entry hall. The sound swept upward, bouncing off a vaulted ceiling 3 stories above me. I switched on my tactical flashlight, its powerful beam cutting a clean white cone through the heavy, stagnant air. Everything was frozen in time. A massive crystal chandelier hung precariously from a frayed steel cable, its thousands of glass facets coated in a thick gray velvet of cobwebs. A grand, sweeping staircase curved up into the darkness of the upper floors, its velvet runner long since rotted away into tattered shreds. "Hello?" I called out. The word left my mouth and was instantly swallowed by the vast, empty house. No echo, just a flat, dead silence that felt almost deliberate. I pulled out the watch. The moment I stepped inside the house, its rhythmic ticking had grown louder, more rapid. The pale blue glow bleeding from the star-mapped face was bright enough now to illuminate the floor around my feet without my flashlight. The gears inside were spinning furiously, as if the watch had finally arrived home and was waking up its sibling mechanisms hidden within the walls. I followed the instructions from the decrypted diary page, walked 20 paces toward the eastern gallery, past the lineage of stone, and seek the descent. I moved down a long, drafty corridor lined with enormous, empty picture frames. The canvases had been neatly sliced out of them a century ago, likely by the family themselves as they prepared to flee, taking their most valuable portraits with them. At the end of the hall stood a massive, life-size statue of a knight in polished black armor. But instead of a sword, the iron figure was holding a massive, non-functional brass astrolabe, an ancient instrument used to track the movements of the stars. I stopped in front of it. I looked at the astrolabe, then down at my watch. The constellation patterns matched perfectly. I reached out and manually turned the heavy brass rings of the statue's astrolabe, aligning Orion with the horizon line just as my watch indicated. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a deep, metallic thunk vibrated through the floorboards beneath my feet. Behind the knight, a hidden panel in the oak wainscoting slid backward with a heavy scrape, revealing a dark, narrow flight of stone steps winding down into the foundations of the house. A blast of air hit me from the opening. It didn't smell like a typical damp, moldy basement. It smelled like ozone, old oil, and polished metal, like a machine shop that had been sealed airtight for 100 years. I unclipped my flashlight from my belt, took a deep breath, and began my descent into the heart of the Stross legacy. Chapter 5. The Chamber of Kronos. The stone steps led me deeper than I ever expected. I counted over 60 steps before the staircase finally opened up into a massive, circular subterranean chamber hewn directly out of the living bedrock of the mountain. My flashlight beam swept across the room, and what I saw made me stop dead in my tracks. This wasn't a wine cellar. It was a masterpiece of Victorian-era industrial engineering. The entire perimeter of the circular room was lined with massive interlocking brass and iron gears, some of them 10 feet tall, their teeth perfectly greased and completely free of rust. Heavy copper pipes ran along the ceiling like thick veins, disappearing into a massive, cylindrical iron structure in the center of the room. It looked like the inside of a monumental, building-sized clock. And it was completely silent. The massive gears sat motionless, waiting for something to kick them into life. In the center of the room, right in front of the central iron cylinder, sat a solid stone pedestal. Atop the pedestal was a heavy, square chest made of dark, tarnished silver, covered in intricate filigree work that mirrored the patterns on the back of my pocket watch. I approached the pedestal, my breath blooming into white clouds in the freezing air. As I got within 3 feet of the silver chest, the pocket watch in my jacket pocket began to vibrate so intensely it felt like a phone ringing on high power mode. I pulled it out. The pale blue light was now a brilliant, pulsing beam, casting sharp, dancing shadows across the brass gears on the walls. The chest had no keyhole, no latch, no visible way to open it. Instead, on the top of the lid, there was a circular depression exactly the same size as my Breguet pocket watch. I looked down at the watch, then at the chest. This was it. The moment of truth. If I was wrong, if this was some elaborate historical prank or a trap designed to destroy the mechanism, I would lose everything. But I hadn't come across an ocean to turn back now. With a steadying breath, I lowered the watch into the circular slot on the chest. It fit perfectly. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The silence in the underground chamber was suffocating. Then, the watch clicked. A bright, blinding flash of blue light flared out from the lapis lazuli face, running like liquid electricity down the filigree lines of the silver chest. Inside the chest, a series of internal tumblers began to turn, a rapid musical cascade of metallic clicks that sounded like a safecracker's dream. With a heavy, pressurized hiss, the lid of the chest unlocked and popped open by an inch. At that exact microsecond, the entire room came alive. The massive 10-foot gears on the walls shuddered. A deep, low-frequency hum vibrated through the stone floor, so powerful I could feel it in my teeth. The copper pipes hissed as pressurized air or fluid began to pump through them. Slowly, deliberately, the monumental clockwork mechanism of the Stross family began to turn. The sound was magnificent, a roaring, rhythmic symphony of ticking, grinding, and aligning metal that filled the subterranean vault with pure, raw mechanical power. Chapter 6. The Vanished Legacy. I reached out with trembling hands and lifted the heavy silver lid of the chest. Inside, resting on a bed of deteriorated black silk, was a leather portfolio embossed with the imperial double-headed eagle and the Stross wolf crest. Next to it sat a heavy, uniquely shaped iron key with an incredibly complex, multi-layered bit that looked more like a modern high-security laser-cut key than something from the 19th century. I picked up the portfolio first. The leather was stiff, but dry. I opened it carefully, my flashlight illuminating the documents inside. They weren't treasury bills or bars of gold. They were something infinitely more valuable. The first document was a formal manifest, written in both Russian and English. It detailed the transfer of a massive, unprecedented cache of wealth, not just gold coin, but priceless historical artifacts, religious relics from the Kremlin archives, and advanced industrial patents, hidden away in a deep-water naval vault beneath the North Sea. But it was the second document that made me completely forget how to breathe. It was a genealogical chart, meticulously maintained and updated with fresh ink, up until the late 1990s. The line of Valerius Arthur Romanov-Von Stross didn't end in 1917. They had successfully integrated into Western society under assumed names, operating from the shadows, using their immense wealth to quietly influence global technology and finance for a century. My eyes tracked down the family tree, following the branches as they split, moved across Europe, and eventually crossed the Atlantic to the United States. I stopped at the very bottom of the final page. There was a photograph attached to the paper with a small brass clip. It was a picture of a woman I recognized instantly. It was my grandmother, photographed in New York City in 1964. Beneath her name, a single final branch extended downward to a name written in fresh, dark blue ink. My name. The watch hadn't ended up at that Chicago flea market by accident. It hadn't been lost. It had been waiting for me. The vendor who sold it to me, the estate sale in Evanston, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a calculated handoff, a silent test, to see if the final descendant of the Stross line had the curiosity, the drive, and the intellect to decode the path and claim their birthright. I stood there in the center of that roaring, ticking mechanical vault, holding the iron key in one hand and the proof of my true identity in the other. I wasn't just a guy who found a cool antique on a Saturday morning anymore. I was the gatekeeper to a century-old secret empire. Chapter 7. The New Dawn, the outro. Holding that key, looking around at this monument to human ingenuity and hidden history, I felt a profound, crushing weight drop onto my shoulders. A connection to a past I never knew existed, and a terrifying responsibility to carry their story forward. The mystery of the dust-covered pocket watch from Chicago was solved. But as you can see, it didn't end the story. It opened up a whole new world of dangerous questions and massive obligations. Now, I'm faced with the ultimate choice. Do I keep this legacy buried here in the freezing dark of the Scottish Highlands to protect the secrets of my bloodline? Or do I bring the truth to light, open that deep-water vault, and show the world what the Romanov-Von Stross family left behind? The gear